Well, good afternoon. I'm Lisa Lavia, and I'm Managing Director of the Noise Abatement Society.
And I'm Dr. Harry Witchel, and I'm a scientist. And the title of this talk, as you've just heard, is Applied Soundscape, How Sound Connects Us.
And we're going to start off with a demonstration about what Soundscape is. Then we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are and why we're promoting and researching Soundscape. Then we'll start off with some of our work and what we're doing about it, and we'll finish with some thoughts about Soundscape and what we can all be doing about it. But first, Harry needs to set up with his gizmos. Are you ready yet?
Yeah. So we're going to start with a small demonstration of how to measure soundscape in a really simple or simplistic way of doing this. And what you see on the screen is a VU meter. So that's actually measuring sound pressure levels, but in an uncalibrated way. And we've got a microphone over there that's picking up that sound. So, what you'll see is also, if you look at the needle in the dial, it's bouncing up and down. So the silence in this room isn't really silent. Actually, silence in this room is about, there you go, it's about 52 decibels. Can't catch. So that's about right. Now, by the way, you can make your own sound pressure measurements just by going online and buying, for next to nothing, an app for your phone. So you can do that anywhere. But our first demonstration, we're going to play for you two different soundscapes. And what I'd like you to do is listen to the soundscapes and hear what they sound like and feel what you feel, but also look at what's going on in the VU meter and see how that compares. So if we can compare, look at our first soundscape, which is going to, Peter, can we have the bird song, please? Okay, that's great. Now, next we're going to show you a different soundscape, which is a piece of music concrete by Zbigniew Karkowski, along with Lee Chin-sung, from the underground noise scene. Are you ready for this, Lisa?
I'm never going to be ready for this, Harry.
Peter, can we have the Karkowski, please? Well, that's great, thank you. Wonderful,
Thank
isn't
God.
it? So people actually paid to listen to that live. Karkowski is an absolute genius he's a genius in terms of the underground noise scene. But the point of that demonstration is that although those two different soundscapes had similar levels on the VU meters, and that means that they had kind of similar loudnesses on average, those two are nothing alike. Your response to them and what they're good for are completely different.
What this helps to demonstrate is that the decibel unit of measurement is simply not sufficient to let us know what annoys us and really to understand how to predict what is a good soundscape in a certain context. And that's because it doesn't take into account sound quality characteristics. And that means that it's unfit to be used on its own as a measure for design specifications or regulations in our built environment.
So that's our conclusion. Decibels is too simple a measurement. That's it. We're done. You can go home now.
Well, we're not quite finished because we haven't really talked about how sound connects us. So I'll start off to tell you a bit about how I came into this topic. I joined ISO Working Group 54 on Soundscape in 2009. That's the International Organization for Standardization, which is an international body that helps to set standards for various things. And this was the first time an acoustic standard was being looked at to describe and set a standard for soundscape. And I joined the group, and it's multidisciplinary with scientists and researchers and practitioners from across the board. And they were talking about how by designing for the acoustic environment at the beginning of projects, we end up with a much better result for the built environment and therefore for all of our peace, comfort, and safety. And I was hooked. I knew that this was the type of group and type of project that I needed for the work that I was doing at the Noise Abatement Society. And I committed myself to help to get this standard passed, which it did in 2014, and it was adopted by 18 countries around the world, including the UK, the US, Japan, China, and most of Europe. So it's very exciting, but we're still at the beginning of this. And so in order to show how this could work in the real world, I began to work with Dr. Witchel, and our first collaboration was an arts and social regeneration project with White Knight and Brighton Hove City Council to look at how crowds were affected by adverse acoustic environments in the center of the city's busiest clubbing district. And we called this project West Street Story because it took place on West Street, and it was on a busy Saturday night.
My interest in science is in nonverbal behavior, so things like body language. And we measure nonverbal behavior in order to, on people and crowds, in order to understand what people are feeling and thinking at a given point. Now, as a sideline, I love music, and I was a drummer, and I've been in many bands over the years. And one thing you can't help but notice during a gig is that sound, and in particular music, has a profound effect upon people's feelings, emotions, and also on their behavior. And I don't just mean dancing. So in a moment, what we're going to do to show you how revealing nonverbal behavior can be is we're going to show you one tiny aspect of nonverbal behavior, which is called a back touch. In a back touch, two people are walking side by side, and one person takes their hand and touches the other person on the small of the back, just like that. So it's not a push, it's not a shove, it's just a light, gentle tap. And what it means is that the person doing the back touch wants to be reestablish or express their connection to the other person. But this connection can be ambiguous. It could mean that they love the other person, it could mean that they want to reassure the other person, or that they want to reassure themselves. But it could also mean that they want to steer the other person, to control the other person, or even to own the other person. Now in a moment, we're going to show you a movie showing on this White Knight experiment two people walking next to each other, a boy and a girl, and doing a back touch so that you can see what it looks like. Pete, are we ready for the movie, please? And here we are. And the boy is on the right, and there's the back touch. And now he's almost got his hand in hand, and he's about ready to lead her through the night. So he stopped there. Great. So that's really simple. Back touch. You touch the other person, and it looks like you want to be more connected. Now we're going to do something much more complicated with this. You're going to watch a 15-second negotiation between three women on that same night, out for a night on the town, as they're negotiating between each other where they want to go to have a good time for that night. What you'll see is that there's three women. One of them is a woman dressed in white, and she's the leader, and you can tell she's the leader because she's marching in front, and she expects them to all follow her. Then you're going to see behind her a woman in a blue denim jacket, and she is going to challenge the leadership. And you'll see that challenge because they'll all stop and argue about whether or not the woman in blue wants to follow. On the side, this leadership challenge will create so much confusion for the third woman, who's on the left with the short dress, that she will feel like she's being torn apart, literally like a chicken's wishbone. And you'll be able to see that she's feeling torn apart because she'll make the following gesture. At the end of this negotiation, the woman in the blue jacket will win. She will make a successful leadership challenge, and all three women will turn around and come back in the same direction in which they came. But this will be unsatisfactory for the woman in white. She will reestablish her leadership by walking up to the woman in the blue jacket and doing a back touch, and then she'll walk in front of them and lead them on as if she's been in charge all along. Okay? Very simple. Can we see that now, Pete? By the way, this is in half speed. So here we go. Here's the woman in white. She's leading them. And the woman in the blue jacket is slowing them down, but from behind. And here begins the negotiation. And they don't necessarily agree. Here's the leadership challenge, and here's the woman on the side doing a little, she's really being torn to pieces. And now they decide to all go back in the direction that they've come. But the woman in white is not completely satisfied, having lost the leadership advantage. Here she goes for the back touch. There it is. And now she walks in front of them and reestablishes her leadership. And they're all following her again.
So, hearing is sometimes described as the Cinderella sense, always working, seldom seen, often misunderstood. But sound affects everything that we do, psychologically, emotionally, and physically. And when we're in environments with good acoustic quality, we automatically feel more relaxed. And this is really important because the visual design of our towns and cities is put at the forefront. However, the acoustic design of spaces is often overlooked until it's too late. And this becomes important when we look at things like open plan offices, for instance, where it's very easy to talk to one another, but can be hard to understand one another sometimes due to speech intelligibility because of poor acoustics, or difficulty concentrating on certain tasks, or in hospitals, where patient recovery rates are adversely affected due to noise pollution. But the definition of soundscape, according to the new standard, is the acoustic environment as it is perceived and understood by people in context. And most importantly, it defines sound as an environmental resource, much like air quality or landscape or water. And it defines noise as a waste byproduct due to lack of soundscape management. So sound makes a space a place. And when we're in places with good acoustics, we automatically feel more relaxed because of its subconscious effect on us. And when we're more relaxed, we're much more connected with one another. That's why it matters. Conversely, when we're in environments with poor acoustics, we're automatically more stressed biologically and psychologically, therefore far more likely to react to one another poorly or to disconnect or try to withdraw, or in acute situations, react aggressively.
So, in a traditional noise control situation, problems are often solved by either stopping the sound, that is stopping the human or machine's activity, or blocking the sound, say putting up a wall or putting up a building so the sound never reaches our ears. This means in traditional noise regulations, typically what they're measuring is nothing but decibel levels, i.e. the loudness.
But we know that certain sounds, like fingernails on a chalkboard, for instance, or a dripping tap, can be highly annoying and distressing, even though they're not very loud, and that's because of their sound quality characteristics in a certain context. Whereas other sounds, like a loud music concert, can be incredibly unifying and community and connecting experience, nothing to do with how loud it is, because we like the sounds that we're hearing in that particular context.
That's what makes soundscape so special. In a soundscape approach, we always check what stakeholders want in addition to the place and time of day. Also in a soundscape approach, there's an alternative to just stopping or blocking the sound. You can add sound either to interfere with or mask noise in the background, or just to make the soundscape better and more appropriate for what people want. There's been a creation of the ISO standard on soundscape, which may lead to regulation, and this will allow us to design our cities and towns using soundscape from the very beginning of the design process. Because if you consider sound at the beginning of a process, it is a resource, it's an opportunity. But if you leave sound until the end of a project, it becomes a cost.
And most importantly, in a soundscape approach, the community is at the center. Spaces for people. They become co-specifiers of the outcome. And this has informed our work with Brighton Hove, where they asked us to look at areas that had adverse, unpleasant acoustic environments to see if we could use these approaches to reduce the impact of harsh and aggressive sounds like traffic noise, honking horns, echoes in reverberant places, and shouting.
So what we did in the White Knight project was we wanted to see what happened on Brighton's most busy clubbing street when we installed an immersive three-dimensional soundscape. So we put up 6 large speakers and played through them a curated, slow, soothing music. Now, it wasn't particularly loud, certainly not compared to the music inside the clubs, but it was pervasive. This means that you could talk to people nearby and you could hear what other people nearby were saying. But if you shouted, you couldn't dominate the immersive soundscape.
But most importantly, this wasn't sounds or music that we would have necessarily chosen, or indeed that the council would have chosen, or that the artists themselves would have chosen had this been only an arts installation. This was a co-curated soundscape designed specifically to create a peaceful and inclusive feeling environment so that when people came out of the clubs, they could feel a bit more calm and relaxed before they left the area.
So what we found as preliminary results we looked at 2 different Saturday nights. One was a control Saturday night, where we left the usual honking of horns and the shouting, and the other was this immersive soundscape. And we tested things by using cameras to capture people's behavior and then analyzing the behavior, the nonverbal behavior, as we showed. What we saw as a preliminary result was that people were better behaved, if you like, they had improved behavior on the night with the immersive soundscape. That is, they had fewer territorial behaviors, and they showed more gestures that were friendly and inclusive. And let's just see, there it is.
So based on the success of West Street's story, the council asked if we could apply this approach to a disused pedestrian subway that had been closed due to antisocial behavior, to see if the approach could work so that the subway could be reopened for public amenity, safety, and to improve access to the seafront. We called this experiment West Street Tunnel.
So in the West Street Tunnel, which is, you can see there, what we did is we installed cameras as well as a small number of songs into a tunnel that people would only hear for about 30 seconds as they walked through. And we were able to show that people sped up slightly if we sped up the music. But we also showed, amazingly, that people became more generous. That is, when people walked through the tunnel and we had charity collectors at the end of the tunnel, depending on which music they had, if we were playing music that was soothing and classical, people gave twice as much. Sorry, that was the computer vision. People gave twice as much to the, when they had just heard for 30 seconds the classical music than in silence. And for the other music, it was halfway in between for jazz and dance. This shows that the soundscape can actually make people more pro-social.
So what our work in mounting evidence shows is that in our modern day lives we're bombarded by noise, and listening has for many of us become secondary to the visual sense. But an applied soundscape approach gives us so many options to design acoustic spaces fit for people that give us better livability, sustainability, and workability in our towns and cities. And most importantly, this multidisciplinary approach brings together science, society, and the arts to give us agile and creative solutions that can change over time. It's not about noise control anymore.
So silence isn't the solution. In fact, there is no such thing as silence, as we showed with the VU meter before.
The solution is applied soundscape design.
Thank you.